Well, hello and welcome to episode 262 of Stand Up. Joining me today, former White House speechwriter and author of several books, staff writer at The Atlantic, David Frum joins the podcast for the first time, and investigative reporter from DC Report, Pulitzer Prize winner, David Cay Johnston joins me. I am Pete Dominick. It's time to stand up with me right now. Hey guys, happy Tuesday if you are listening in order. It is January 5th, and I hope that you are doing okay. Thanks for taking me with you for some of your day-to-day, learning and growing along with me. That's what Stand Up is supposed to be doing each and every day. I'll hope to see you on Thursday night if you're a subscriber to the Stand Up community, where we have a hangout every Thursday. And if not, if you aren't, then sign up now, patreon.com/Pete Dominick, or go to the paid subscription link in the show notes. So much happening this week. You've got the Georgia runoff elections today. You have the certification of the electoral vote on Wednesday, and potential protests and violence in D.C. and maybe other areas as well on Wednesday. And then what comes? Well, we will see, of course, and I try not to speculate too much about it, but I did have great conversations with both David Cay Johnston and David Frum, and those are coming up. But before that, I got some audio for you and also a news dump coming up. I do want to take a quick moment to check in with your humanity and see how you are. I read that letter from Congressman Jamie Raskin, who's been on the show, really great guy, and his wife wrote about their son who just passed away, and it seems like he took his life and he was suffering from depression, but the letter about him and his life was just so great, and it was so heartbreaking, in fact, that the word heartbreaking was trending on Twitter last night. And I just wanted to take a moment to check in with you and see how you and you or your family are doing. It seems like every day there are some really tough moments for most of us. And I just want you to know you're not alone. And it's hard to figure out what is happening in our world right now. And it's hard not to be scared much of the time. And if that's you, I get it. I understand. I relate to it. And if it's not you, then tell the rest of us what you're doing, what your practice is. I caught up with my friend Peter Coyote today. We spoke for about an hour, and I'll share that interview with you this week as well. A lot of people have been asking to hear from him. It's always great to speak with him and learn about his practice and life and way of doing things. But I think it's super helpful when we share those ideas with each other. I'll be talking with some of you hopefully throughout the week about that. And about how you are doing, as I always tend to do, as well as Thursday night in our hangout, and I'm looking forward to that. I've definitely been struggling a little bit, always worried about this project and people not subscribing or ending their subscription and not being able to do this gig anymore, because I love what I've built, what we have built here. I worry about that. I worry about my marriage. I worry about my daughters, of course. I worry about my parents. I worry about all the other existential threats that we face. But I try to come back to my center and be mindful and be thankful for this very moment that I have right now, which is I'm standing in my shed talking into a microphone to you. And for that, I am so grateful and so conscious and so thankful and so purpose-driven. So thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Tell your friends, and I hope you're doing okay, is really all I was trying to say there. Okay. Let's start with All In on MSNBC, where I got a couple clips from for today's show. Chris Hayes had former Department of Justice Inspector General and Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Michael Bromwich, is a pretty well-respected guy, on his show, and he asked him if he'd ever seen this level, referencing the phone call and other issues, this level of corruption at any level of government, city, state, or federal, or anywhere else in the rest of the world. And Michael Bromwich had this to say.
Short answer is no. I've never seen corruption on this scale on any level, where you have, in this case, the chief executive of the country engaging in all manners of illegal activity to accomplish his goals, in this case, winning the presidential election. I think I lived through Watergate. I was in college at the time. And I think Nixon was a piker compared to Donald Trump. What he did was awful. He deserved to leave office. But if you compare just phone calls, some of the Watergate tapes with this phone call, there's no comparison. And if you look at the full range of conduct that Richard Nixon engaged in, it doesn't hold a candle to what Donald Trump has engaged in. So no, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. I'm not aware of anything like it in our history. And I haven't heard anybody suggest anything that is any worse than what we're seeing now.
Yeah, pretty significant, really significant. But as I talk with David Frum, so many things happen. It's hard to understand the impact and the weight of those things and those issues and those crimes and controversies and scandals each and every day because they come so fast and furiously. All right, let's head over to Fox News, where Brett Baier pressed Congressman Josh Hawley from Missouri, who is by I don't know, not all accounts, but many accounts, a nakedly ambitious, corrupt, unethical, unprincipled human being. And even on Fox News, Brett Baier pushed hard on what Josh Hawley was trying to do with the shenanigans over Wednesday's Electoral College certification.
We've seen courts across the country deal not only with not the standing of different cases, but also the evidence, and some of them Trump judges. I just want to pin you down on what you're trying to do. You know, are you trying to say that as of January 20th, that President Trump will be president?
Well, Brett, that depends on what happens on Wednesday. I mean, this is why we have the debate.
No, it doesn't. I mean, the states, by the Constitution, say they certify the election. They did certify it. By the Constitution, Congress doesn't have the right to overturn the certification, at least as most experts read it.
Well, Congress is directed under the 12th Amendment to count the electoral votes. There's a statute that dates back to the 1800s, rather, 19th century, that says that there is a right to object, there's a right to be heard, and there's also a certification process.
That's from 1876, Senator, and it's right. the Tilden-Hayes race, in which there were 3 states that did not certify their electors. So Congress was left to come up with this system, this commission, that eventually got to a negotiated grand bargain. But now all of the states have certified their elections as of December 14th, so it doesn't, by constitutional ways, open a door to Congress to overturn that, does it?
Well, no, I'm talking about the statute, Brett. There's a statute that says, that governs what Congress does on January the 6th, and it says that we have a vote of certification and that we have the opportunity to debate the results, to certify the results. We count them, and then we certify. And my point is, this is my only opportunity during this process to raise an objection and to be heard. I don't have standing to file lawsuits. I'm not a prosecutor anymore. I used to be, but I'm not anymore. I can't investigate claims of voter fraud on my own, but I do have a responsibility in this joint session of Congress to either say I've got no problem with it or I do have a problem with it. And my constituents expect me, and they're right to say I have a problem. Don't you have a responsibility to your constituents?
Don't you have a responsibility to tell them that it's not going to be President Trump as of January 21st as well?
Well, Brett, I'm trying to do something more than just that. I mean, this is about the integrity of our elections. And this is about taking a stand where you can take a stand. I mean, I suppose you can just say, well, listen, nothing I do will matter. It won't matter if I object or not, so I'll just sit by and do nothing. I mean, that's one approach, but I can tell you that the people of my state, they won't understand that, and they shouldn't. They say you have the opportunity to stand up and be heard and to object. You have the opportunity to try and force change, and you should, and that's what I'm going to do.
Ah, you bastard. I mean, horrible. I don't know. Words escape how upsetting that is and how much bullshit he's slinging, and that he knows that he is slinging that bullshit. It's how does one live with himself? Really? Oh, all right. Here is Senator Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor. This is from a week or so ago, but here he is addressing what Senator Josh Hawley is attempting to do.
And today we heard from the junior senator from Missouri that he intends to object to election results, particularly in Pennsylvania, a state where the Trump campaign and its allies have brought no fewer than 13 lawsuits and lost every single one, many with Republican judges ruling. There have been only 3 individuals, 3, charged with voter fraud in Pennsylvania, and in each case, the person voted for Trump. The effort by the sitting president of the United States to overturn the results is patently undemocratic. The effort by others to amplify and burnish his ludicrous claims of fraud is equally revolting. This is America. We have elections. We have results. We make arguments based on the fact and reason, not conspiracy and fantasy. On January 6th, the Congress will meet to formally recognize the Electoral College result. There is a very clear process to handle and dispense with objections from members of Congress to the counting of the result, and that's just what we'll do, dispense with them. The Congress will ratify the Electoral College's decision that Joe Biden will be president and Kamala Harris will be vice president on January 6th. And make no mistake about it, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be sworn in as president and vice president on January 20th.
Okay, so I understand getting her name wrong if you hadn't heard it a lot of times, but he served in the Senate with her. And once she was the vice president, and even before, someone made it very easy to remember how to pronounce her name. Just think of the word comma, the punctuation, comma, Kamala. I haven't forgotten it since. I mean, I get names wrong all the time, but it seemed a little bit doddering to me and disrespectful. You got to get that right. If you're the Senate majority leader and you served with her and she's going to be the vice president, the rest of what he said was good, though. All right, the most trusted name in medicine, Dr. Anthony Fauci, was on MSNBC's All In with Chris Hayes, and Chris Hayes asked him why we were not doing very well with distributing the vaccine, these miracle vaccines. Why is it going so slow? It seems like it's not working. What is wrong? He asked him.
Well, actually, we don't know really precisely why, Chris. If you look at the allocation versus what's shipped, what's distributed, but the bottom line is what's getting into people's arms. So we were supposed to get 20 million doses that were distributed. We have about 14 million of those. So we're a little bit short on that. Hopefully we'll catch up with that in the next few days. But the real question is we have about 4+ million in the arms of people. We've got to get that up. We've got to get the pace up. We're not where we want to be. There's no doubt about it. No excuses. Hopefully that is a reflection of trying to start a very big program that is complicated, as well as having done right in the middle of a holiday season where you don't have all the cylinders going at the same time. I think we should wait and take a look at the next week or so. If we get back on pace, good. If not, we got to start looking at what the reason for that is and how we're going to correct it.
Chris Hayes also asked Dr. Anthony Fauci what might change in 16 days when Joe Biden becomes president.
Well, I think the issue that's on everybody's mind is the efficiency and the effectiveness of getting the vaccine rolled out. President-elect Biden has made it very clear his goal is at least 100 million doses in the first 100 days, namely 1 million doses a day. We can do that, Chris. I mean, this is something that's doable. We've had historically things that we've done in the past as far back as 1947 when we had a big full court press on getting people vaccinated for smallpox in New York City. It can be done. You get everything in the right place, everybody cooperating, everybody collaborating, and we could do it. That's the main issue that we want to get done in those first 100 days.
Yeah, the 47 example, I forget the numbers, but it's remarkable to look back and look at 1947 polio vaccination in New York.
Yeah, smallpox, Chris, we vaccinated 6,350,000 people in 2 weeks in one city.
Wow.
In one city, New York City. I was one of the people who was a 6-year-old boy who got vaccinated back then, and they did it. So if we can do it that way, we can do it now.
The last time I had you on this program, I asked you, when normal would return, particularly of particular importance to me playing pickup basketball. The members of my game are watching right now for this. You, a basketball player for Regis High School yourself, had said that the third quarter of this year, 2021, and definitely into the fourth, you can play pickup basketball, sweating in each other's faces, right? The high sort of risk activity. Is that still how you're thinking of the timeline?
The answer, Chris, is yes. If we get the people vaccinated who can and should be vaccinated. I've said that in order to get what I would consider a good herd immunity, we don't know exactly the number, but it's somewhere in the range between 70 and 85% of the people vaccinated. If we put the kind of pressure on the way we're talking now, getting that 1 million people per day vaccinated, by the time we get to the middle and end of the summer, we could have that veil, that envelope, that umbrella of herd immunity that could protect us. And then you and I can get out on a court and play some pickup basketball, because there'll be level of virus will be so low in the community that it won't pose a risk to us.
All right, there's a couple clips from Dr. Anthony Fauci, 14 more days as of when I am taping this opening. And one more thing, finally, here in the What Happened Yesterday audio segment of the podcast. I'm not sure where this or when this clip of Alex Trebek on Jeopardy comes from, but I saw it last night on Twitter, and I wanted to share it here at the end of the audio segment with you.
Now, Johnny. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You'll recall that about a month ago, I asked all of you to take a moment to give thanks for all of the blessings that you enjoy in your lives. Now, today, a different kind of message. This is the season of giving. I know you want to be generous with your family, your friends, your loved ones. But today, I'd like you to go one step further. I'd like you to open up your hands and open up your heart to those who are still suffering because of COVID-19. People who are suffering through no fault of their own. We're trying to build a gentler, kinder society. And if we all pitch in just a little bit, we're going to get there.
Oh, I hope you're right, Alex Trebek. And we already miss you. Oh, man. Okay, so now it's time to talk about some quick headlines that are not COVID related and that are not politics directly. It's time for the news dump.
They call them dumps, big, massive dumps.
All right, let's start in Pittsburgh, where the city was rocked by two separate explosions. Police in Pittsburgh investigating after explosions in two different parts of the city over the weekend. Police first responded to calls Sunday between 9 p.m. and 9:30. Their reported improvised explosive device had been chucked from a moving vehicle in the Lawrenceville neighborhood. When cops arrived at the scene, they found a parked vehicle that had been damaged. They say surveillance footage showed the device being thrown from a white pickup truck. Then at around 10:30 p.m., a second explosion was called in from the Hill District, located about 10 minutes away by a car. No injuries reported in either incident, but it looks like some dumb teenagers to me. I hope that's all it is. Here's a crazy story. Actress Tanya Roberts isn't dead. I don't usually talk about people passing away, but if we thought they passed away and they somehow come back to life, I definitely want to mention that. The Associated Press and every other news outlet is now reporting that despite obituaries appearing in numerous outlets, actress Tanya Roberts is still alive. She was in James Bond and That 70s Show, and last night I read about her passing away, but apparently she was mistakenly reported dead by her publicist earlier Monday. I don't know what the confusion was. I don't really care, but she's 65 years old, and she's still alive, but was in apparently poor condition after she collapsed in her home and was admitted to the hospital. All right, so I hope she's doing better. A big player in online messaging had a global outage yesterday. Slack, the messaging services used. I've never used Slack. Never used it. I don't even know what it looks like. And I hope I never do. I've got too many messaging services. It suffered a global outage on Monday, the first day back for most people returning after the new year. I give you one business headline. I thought this is a pretty big deal. Shareholders approved a Fiat Chrysler PSA merger, which now creates the fourth largest automaker. Fiat Chrysler Automobiles and Group PSA, the French maker of Peugeot and Citroën cars, expect their merger to be complete on January 16th. Shareholders of both companies overwhelmingly approved the merger on Monday. You like how I said that, don't you? Citroën. Okay, and finally, from ABC News out of Westfield, Massachusetts, a veteran has returned a sword that he stole from a statue of a Revolutionary War general 40 years ago, telling the head of the Massachusetts Town's Historical Commission that he regretted taking it. The chair of Westfield's Historical Commission, Cindy Gaylord, said a man contacted the city hall saying he had the sword stolen from the town's statue, General William Shepherd, in 1980. Wow. How about that? They agreed to give him anonymity if he returned the bronze sword and arranged for his wife to drop it off at her home. That's crazy. Wow. 40 years of regret. Yeah, that'll add up. And he returned the sword. I like that, and I think that's a good place to end the news dump on. All right. Well, let's get to my first guest, shall we? He was a regular on the old show at SiriusXM. He was a former speechwriter for George W. Bush. He has authored over 10 books. He's a staff writer at The Atlantic. He is really good on Twitter. He's Canadian. He's Jewish. He's married with grown kids. And we always enjoy our conversations. Frankly, I have no idea why I hadn't reached out to him earlier, because he's a smart guy, great guy to talk to. Don't always agree with him on everything, obviously, on some of the things he did and said during the Bush administration. But we're all very complex, and I think David Frum is a super thoughtful guy and always kind to me. He's always been very kind to me, as you can hear at the top of the interview. He was happy to be joining me again for the first time in a long time. We talked about his most recent book, Trumpocalipse, and we also talked about his recent reporting or writing at The Atlantic, which I think is really great. You must subscribe if you haven't already, just for David's writing. It's unique, it's introspective, it's thoughtful, it's historical, and I always love talking to him, and here's my first conversation with David Frum on the podcast. Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, there he is, David Frum. A lot of people have been asking, where's David Frum been on the podcast? And my answer to them is, I don't know. But I'm psyched to have you joining me finally. It's been far too long since we spoke. Thank you very much for Zooming with me.
Oh, what a pleasure.
You have written a lot of articles at The Atlantic. You've published a second book on Trump now, first Trumpocracy, then Trumpocalypse. Can you just remind folks about what those books were about and how they're different, and I think why they're still relevant?
Thank you. Well, first, it's such a pleasure to see you, and I'm glad to see you.
That's very
thriving and flourishing. So I wrote, as you say, I've written uncountable numbers for The Atlantic. That's the nature of the new age of internet media, that you have to be fast and you have to be on top of things. I've written some long form things as well, and the books are the two longest. I didn't set out to write a two-part history of the Trump administration, but that's what I ended up doing. And the two titles sort of suggest what they're about. So Trumpocracy, the word, the second half of that word, Trump, we all know, comes from the Greek word meaning system of power, democracy, autocracy, Trumpocracy. So that book was about how did Trump gain power and how did he use power. The second book, Trumpocalypse, we use apocalypse casually to mean like the end of the world, zombie apocalypse, but that's actually not literally what it means. An apocalypse is a revelation. What in the Christian Bible, what is being revealed is the end of the world. So that's how the transition happened. But literally it means, it's from two Greek words. It means to take the cover off something, to show you what's going to happen. So Trumpocalypse was a study of what was going to happen in the final months of the Trump administration, and then some suggestions for how to right the country afterward. Because, Trump's such a mountebank, such a fraudster. He couldn't have got this far in a healthier society. We have problems, and Trumpocalypse is a lot about how to fix them.
Well, I think we have to talk about the problems and where they began. A lot of people like to say it didn't begin with Trump. So if you agree with that premise, where did it begin? How did our country and our electorate, the ground, get seated to support this maniac reality show grifter?
Well, people do say that, exactly as you say. I'm going to disclose a bias here. So I was born in Canada. I still spend a lot of time in Canada. So a naturalized American, but I look at America a little bit with an outsider's eye. So a lot of Americans say, let's look at the things in the American past that explain where Trump came from. My bias is to say, let's not look only backward in time. Let's look sideways in space, because you have Trumps happening in other countries all around the world, both in developed countries. You have these neo-fascist parties in Germany and in France and even in the Netherlands. And of course, in the less developed countries in Mexico and Brazil. So I think you have to explain Trump both with reference to things that happened in the American past. But if it's only about the American past, then you are going to miss the question, where does the alternative for Germany come from? So I see him as something that has to be explained both in space and in time, both because there are similar things happening in other developed countries.
You're one of those guys who I could ask questions to forever, maybe mount one or two arguments with over the years, mainly on marijuana, and who I could also watch debate and read, because you're very thoughtful and you have a tremendous amount of experience and you're an excellent writer. But I think the problem with people like you is that and the reason why we're at where we're at to some extent is social media. You touched on this earlier. Like, you're writing these thoughtful things, you're doing these interviews, and yet so much of what happens is decided instantaneously and then broadcast around the world rapidly. How much of new media, new technology, specifically social media, do you think has changed the game for intellectuals, authors, commentators like yourself who like nuance and context, and you specifically love history, which I think is so important?
Yeah. Well, look, I do love history, and I do love long form. I read long and I write long. When I joined The Atlantic part-time,
you're also excellent on Twitter, though.
Well, thank you. My editor, who's a brilliant editor, Yoni Applebaum, said, we can actually track how long our readers read, and we can discover they will read long. I said, Yoni, telling me that our readers like to read long, it's like telling an alcoholic there's a second bottle of rye above the refrigerator. It's asking for trouble. Look, I think we are where we are, and I think in any age, you can't complain about the forms of the age. If we were around a couple hundred years ago, we said, here we are. We love to write verse. Verse is so beautiful, and yet there are people who insist on reading and writing these trashy novels that are written in prose without meter or rhyme. You have to adapt to the art forms of your time and make them work for you. And so I have, I do think Facebook is a genuinely sinister force, and I stay off it. But I think Twitter, my friend Christopher Hitchens used to say about alcohol, I've gotten more out of it than it's gotten out of me. So I find it, recognizing all of its many capacities for ill, I still find it both a good way to get information and a good way to reach people and to get them to try to induce them to read the longer form things that I write.
Where are we right now in America with our feelings about and towards democracy? Because it would seem to me that a lot of Americans have no idea what the concept even is. And I wonder, going back to history, if it's because we've had it for so long, 2 generations really, or at least one, don't remember what it was like to fight these big battles. And for my entire lifetime, I have been told that it's America's job to spread this democracy around the world. Where are we? How does a certain percentage of Americans see democracy in January 2020?
Well, we're speaking on the evening of January the 4th, and we have 2 very difficult and dark days ahead of us. The president is going to Georgia tomorrow, January 5th, to try to the purpose is that he's doing normal campaigning in an election, but obviously he's trying to bring more and more pressure to bear on Republican officials in Florida to split the state to him in a way that just seems so un-American and radical. And then on January the 6th, we're going to have this performance in the House of Representatives where Republicans are going to try to set aside the whole election, and we'll see what Vice President Pence does. So it's a dark moment. But you said something right off the top that I think is maybe God sent us this to humble us a little bit. as you say, I mean, the people of our age, and you're a half generation younger than me, but, we were raised on the story of democracy. The story of American democracy is it goes up and up and up, and Andrew Jackson, the vote is extended to white men without property. And then the 15th Amendment, black men are brought into the vote. And then the 19th Amendment, women get it. And it's up, 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 always going forward, 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 better, better, better. And the real truth is democracy has always been contested. The idea that all human beings have equal worth is a profoundly radical and destabilizing idea that is never welcome to people with position and power. I'm sort of one of those people. But so I recognize how destabilizing that is. And we are living in a moment where the democratic idea in America has been going backwards for a while, as it has at other times in the past. And we are just as we are able to understand the terrible pandemic flu of 1918, 1919 better because we've lived through something like this ourselves. We're now better. I mean, people like Ted Cruz say, we should do this like 1876, 77, and which was once one of the boring passages in the history book between the Civil War and World War II. We now know that America in the years between the Civil War and World War II became a less democratic society, a less free society. And we're living that. And so we understand that history better because we have suffered it too.
Do you think that it is just so much more difficult for a country like America, a multicultural country, which is supposed to be what makes us great, to have and keep democracy than it might be in a more homogenous country?
Yeah, that's an unfashionable opinion, but I think I do believe that. I think this way. Democracies have historically been in small, cohesive places, and big multicultural societies have either been ruled brutally from the top, or to the extent they've been freer societies, they've done it by not allowing people to participate. Like the 19th century, like the Ottoman Empire and the Habsburg Empire in the 19th century, there was no political participation, so the different groups couldn't turn on each other in the way that they did in the 20th century. That said, multiculturalism, multi-ethnicity, I don't know what multiculturalism, multi-ethnicity is our present and our future. And so there isn't a lot of choice about making a success of it. That's the great political challenge for us, is can we make a success of this? And you say it's such a powerful thing you say. I mean, that there's a way of looking at these problems and asking people to make predictions. What do you think? Do you think it'll work? And that makes you a spectator. It makes it like an opinion or something you watch. This is something we live. So the question of whether or not it's going to succeed, that's not something you observe. It's something that you are committed to. You say, I will make it. I will do everything I can to make it a success, because it has to be a success.
I have a million questions for you about Trump himself and what he has done and how it can be undone. But your most recent piece at The Atlantic is Trump crosses a bright red line. The president's nonstop abuse of power seems determined to force a reckoning. Can you kind of articulate how we got here by talking about some of the abuses of power that certainly seem unprecedented for even, a mayor or a governor? I always like to say, if a mayor appointed his son to dog catcher or his daughter to, the town council, there would be a massive scandal. And he or she would never do that, because nepotism is not generally seen, unless it's, a family business, as something that is becoming for a public official. So, I would start with his family being such a crucial part to his administration. Yeah. But I mean, the abuses of power that have gotten to this point, and to your latest article, this bright red line.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that people ask about my books is there anything new in them? Because I'm not one of these great reporters at the Washington Post and the New York Times. I'm not unearthing new scandals all the time. So is there anything new in your books? And I would say, no. But it will seem new because you've forgotten it.
Because the number of atrocious things that have happened that you have forgotten, and rediscovering those atrocious things is actually even more important than discovering the new atrocious things.
It's such an important point. Make it a different way. Make that point a different way, because it's such an important point. And I'll give you an example. We aren't talking about the pardons, which were so egregious and outrageous and deeply offensive, because we're talking about the phone call.
Right. Exactly. Well, the article you cited, and I have to say, this is one of those rare occasions where I didn't love the title that The Atlantic gave it, because it made it seem like I was saying, oh, now we're at the red line.
Right.
And, we were at the red line. It's like a hockey game. I mean, we go back and forth across the red line, 2 times every minute. But the point of that phrase in the article at the red line was, look, there have been red lines and red lines and red lines, and Trump crosses them every single time. So we should understand the crossing of this red line as a prediction of what is the next red line. And the next red line is the question of pardons. As you say, he's pardoned his criminal associates. He's pardoned his former campaign manager. The next red lines are the pardons that are to come of his family, of his in-laws, and then this enormous claxoning red line of the possibility of a presidential self-pardon. And I think we haven't really, no president has ever tried anything like this. I think we need to understand just what an enormous affront that would be if Trump tries to do this. Because once you have the pardon or self-pardon, you can commit any crime, and you can order any crime to be committed. I mean, you could order death squads. Not that Trump has done that, but you could, and then say, well, when prosecuted, I pardon everyone on the death squad, and I pardon myself for giving the order. I mean, it would be the end of law. And to show how seriously this is and how impossible this is, what the constitutional founding fathers had in mind. When the Constitution was written in the 1770s and 80s, the history that everybody involved with that Constitution remembered best was the history of the English Civil War of about 150 years earlier, in the 1640s and 1650s. And one of the things that the Stuart kings had done that triggered the English Civil War was they claimed a power of self-pardon. They called it in those days the dispensing power. The Parliament would pass a law, and the king would say, no, you don't need to, sorry, servant of mine, you do not need to obey that law. And for doing that, the English cut off the head of Charles I. It is not possible that in 1787 that anybody thought the president could pardon himself. They just couldn't imagine that the country would ever elect anyone so dishonorable as to even think of such a terrible thing. It will be, that is the claxoning red line, but we are clearly heading for it, because Trump has to worry. I mean, that call probably involves violations of Georgia law, probably involves violations of federal law. It soliciting or intimidating people to tampering with a voting system or the outcome of an election, that is illegal. And he will have to face consequences for that unless he takes measures to protect himself, which he will be tempted to do.
What does a nation do when a frighteningly large percentage of that nation does not believe the winner of the election is the winner of the election? I mean, there's been so much talk about this kind of parallel presidency, shadow presidency that he will just keep going. I mean, they're going to have an inauguration for him at Mar-a-Lago or something like that. I mean, what do you do in a nation and with a society where a huge percentage of voters, of people who are paying attention to politics, don't believe the truth in reality, and do, by the way, believe in conspiracy?
I hope this comes out the right way, because I don't mean this to be dismissive of anybody. But, you and I were talking about politics because we care about it and because we find it interesting, and to some extent because we find it fun. But large numbers of our fellow citizens don't feel that way. Politics is just a chore. It's something they don't want to pay attention to. So it's not a surprise that they're not hugely well. Think about something you find tedious and unnecessary, something you have to do, like your taxes. How much do you know about tax law? Enough to stay out of prison, maybe. But you're not looking constantly to consume more tax information if it becomes available. If there were shows on TV with tax information, you wouldn't watch them. I feel that way a little bit about professional sports. And when I think about elections, I think about the Super Bowl, the feeling of just brain-crushing tedium the Super Bowl feels.
That's right. I remember that about you. I generally share that. Yeah.
So So our fellow citizens, they know enough, but they don't seek more. And probably it was always true that Americans had low levels of information about politics, were vulnerable to conspiracy theories. Here's what was different: was we used to have an agreement among the people who were very invested in the system. The system was good. The system worked. Well, not perfect, but it worked well enough for everybody. And everybody with large amounts of political information, including even people who were outsiders, including people who represented protest movements, the suffragettes or the civil rights leaders. We have criticisms of the system, but we want to play in it. And we want to take our role. We're not trying to destroy it. And that means that we are going to be good intermediaries between our followers and the flow of information. So even if our followers, even if are vulnerable to disinformation or rumor or conspiracy theories, we're not going to play on that. And we are going to recognize that we all have, those of us who are highly engaged with the system, we have more in common than divides us. We have more of a stake in the system. And I think the perfect moment of expression of that was something I saw close up, which is the 2000 recount between George Bush and Al Gore. That was a pretty ugly fight.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons it was so ugly and so bitter was because ultimately it had no right answer. That it came down to a handful of votes in Florida. American political systems are not subtle enough to measure the vote as finely as the vote needed to be measured in Florida. Al Gore won every fight in the Florida court system. George Bush won every fight in the federal court system. Who deserved to win? It really was a moral coin toss. And I mean, I was there at the time. I was pretty emotionally involved with it. I was a Bush supporter, but looking back on it, I can see why the Gore people felt the way they did. And I'm not going to tell them they were wrong because their arguments were good too. But in the end, we needed an answer. The only institution that could deliver the answer was the U.S. Supreme Court. And maybe they were biased or unfair, but they delivered an answer and everybody accepted it. And Gore gave one of the greatest speeches in his life, accepting it. He didn't like it, but he accepted it because he understood whatever happened to him, Al Gore, as badly as he wanted to be president, that he and everyone around him had more at stake in the system than they had by attacking the system. And so although that was a test, it was a test that the society was able to pass. And we're not passing it now because what should be happening is the people around Trump should say whatever delusions Donald Trump has, that the people around him, I mean, except for the weirdos and the losers, but they should be kept far away from any power anyway. The knowledgeable people around him, they know what happened. And in fact, this is a radically clearer outcome than 2000. 2000 was genuinely murky.
Close. Yeah.
Really hard to say who should have been president after 2000. There's no question. Biden won, like by a lot. In multiple states. And every documented case of voter fraud, by the way, every proven case of voter fraud involves a Trump supporter doing voter fraud the way it's traditionally done in the United States, which is basically the typical American voter fraud is a woman's father dies 2 days before Election Day, and she knew that he really badly wanted to vote for candidate X. And it's his dying wish. And so she doesn't tell anybody that he's dead, and she carries the ballot with her. That is classic voter fraud. When they say dead people voted, it means that their children voted for them to try to execute a dying wish. And those things happen. There are probably a couple of hundred of those in every national election out of the 100 million votes cast.
And the reason why it doesn't happen even more probably is because it's a crime not worth committing.
It's a crime not worth committing. And also because people at some level know, it's not worth committing. There's no upside, and you're going to be caught. And anyway, and it's a crazy dying wish. Ma, I'm sorry. It's not going to make a difference. But when it happens, that is typically how it happens. And that is how it happened in this election. In the cases where we know that it happened, and it typically involved Trump people because basically people who are dying are older, and older people are more pro-Trump.
What do you think about these Republican senators led by Senator Hawley and now Senator Cruz that are, I don't know what phrase you would use to describe what they are doing?
Well, it's both disgusting and hilarious at the same time. So the part of it that is, the disgusting part is obvious, but the hilarious part is, so Josh Hawley, who is a very ambitious and quite clever person, but not super politically nimble. He came up with this scheme And he has some elaborate rationalization of how it's okay and how he's not just denying reality. And what he did not think is, if this scheme works, if I'm there to fundraise off it, I have 2 Labrador retrievers, one in better shape than the other. And the other one, whenever you stroke its head, the younger one comes up, bang, and knocks your hand out of the way. Like, once Josh Hawley demonstrated proof of concept, this was a ways to raise money, bang, there was Ted Cruz, the most cynical person in the Senate, knocking, okay, I'm now in charge of this attempted coup d'etat because it's going to get some money from me. And so there's Josh Hawley it's now the Cruz Hawley project when it was supposed to be Hawley's own. And anyway, he's getting what he deserves. So what do I think of it? It's obviously not going to work. And when you look at the mechanics, it's just not going to work. But it is introducing it. They're taking a game and playing it with knives in a way that we didn't used to do. We've always had, and we've seen that a lot over the last decade. The United States has this crazy system of the debt ceiling, which is a ancient leftover from the way the government was financed in the 19th century. It's a fossil. It's an artifact, and it's stupid. I mean, Congress votes the level of spending. It votes the level of tax. If there's a gap between the level of spending and level of tax, Congress knows that and approved it. So Congress hasn't literally voted for the debt, but it voted for the difference between the spending and the taxing, so voted for the debt. But there's this third vote. You vote for the spending, you vote for the tax, and then you vote to approve the difference of the 2 previous votes. And that always had potential to go wrong, but everyone always understood, well, that would be crazy. That would be destructive. You can't play games with that. And then in 2011, people began to play games with that. And in the end, they didn't actually detonate the suicide device, but they came seconds away. And everyone has to think, okay, that's now part of the repertoire of American politics, detonating the suicide device of the debt ceiling. And in the same way, what is happening now, these are things that I guess it was always possible. No one in the modern history of the United States would ever dare do such a thing, or never occur to them to do such a thing. It would be wrong and be embarrassing, but now it's being done. And now this is a new tool of politics.
Do you feel the same way about the Electoral College as you do about the debt ceiling in terms of it being archaic and irrelevant?
I feel the same way, but the difference is the debt ceiling we get rid of with an easy vote in Congress, whereas the Electoral College we can't. We're stuck with it.
You don't think there's any change on the horizon for the Electoral College?
It would take a constitutional amendment. It would be so extraordinarily difficult. The debt ceiling you get rid of with one vote. In fact, when you hear that, I won't bore your listeners with the story of how we got it, but it's so dumb that it would. Of course, we should have got rid of it, but the Electoral College is a harder thing to deal with.
Final question: what do you think of at this point about 350,000, maybe 500,000 American deaths as compared to other countries? I mean, UK is really suffering. Obviously, you see high numbers in Germany and other really developed countries, similar, if you will, countries in some ways. But America's, of course, the worst. And how much of that is the fault of the federal government leadership?
Well, I'm in no kind of expert about this, and I haven't been that immersed in the details. But it's pretty clear that the genius of the federal system, which is there to prevent the federal government from doing tyrannical things, also prevents the federal government from doing good things. And we're seeing this with the vaccine rollout program. That I don't think it's a coincidence that the country with the most successful vaccination program is Israel, a country with one level of government and a country that's highly militarized and has a long history of preparedness for disasters. The United States just isn't. We're not that kind of a country. We don't. The government is inefficient. The government is wasteful. It's been engineered to be inefficient and wasteful. It's been engineered not to be able to do things that people in the 18th century thought were dangerous, and it's unable to do things that people in the 21st century know are welcome. So I hope we can get our act together a little bit more and throw some. We're going to obviously end up spending more than anybody else to vaccinate the same number of people. But wastefulness is part of the price of the American constitutional system. So let's have some waste and let's address this problem as fast as possible. How much of this is Trump's fault personally? I mean, he's just so terrible at everything. I mean, obviously, he has never cared about this problem at all. He has never been able to think about the virus as anything other than like a tiny microscopic critic of him. And the way he deals with criticism is to pretend it's not there. And so that was his approach to the virus. And he's fathomlessly lazy. So even when he decided, on the rare occasions he would periodically move his bulk to do something, he couldn't imagine what that something was. And so the idea that his administration ended up with is, well, these private companies will invent a vaccine, we'll pay for it, and then we'll load the vaccine in the back of some trucks, and then our job is over. And then, truck needs a driver and a destination and a plan to get the stuff out of the truck, and then a plan beyond that. No, we don't do that. That's too much work.
Are you generally optimistic about the future in general, and how do you feel about the future of this country?
Look, I am from many generations of Ashkenazi Eastern European Jews, and we are genetically engineered to be pessimistic because basically over 1,000 years what happened was people said, this looks like trouble. And there were people who said, let's see how it works out. And there were people who said, let's get the hell out of town. And the people who said, let's get the hell out of town had grandchildren. And the people who said, let's see how it works out, did not. And so you do that enough time that where the people said, let's get out of town at the first sign of trouble, they are the survivors. So I'm psychologically, temperamentally pessimistic. But more seriously, I think it's the wrong question to ask ourselves, because as I said earlier, when you ask questions about optimism, you're inviting us to act like observers. We need to think like participants.
I love it.
So I have no idea what the future holds, but I can't make statements about it. I can't make accurate statements, but I can make accurate statements about my commitments and my actions and my choices. What am I going to do? And through the Trump years, people say, what's going to happen with this or the Republican? I don't know, but I can tell you what I'm going to do.
I like that answer a lot, and I think everybody should ask themselves a similar question and hopefully offer a similar answer. What are you going to do? So all that being said, the bookcase behind you then leads to a safe room?
No.
The Batcave?
The bookcase is actually, I didn't buy these by the yard, but it does have this problem, which is I sort my books alphabetically by author's last name, with fiction on that side of the house and nonfiction on this side of the house. And so if I were a better Washington player, I'd have your book here, but as it is, it's just what you're seeing is F through H is behind me. So,
well, when I have a book, I'll be sure to have it placed strategically on your bookcase. And you once invited me to dinner at your home, and someday I will come and I will look at all of those books, and we will talk about them, and we will drink wine, and I would imagine there'll be a fire going. That's in my mind's eye, but.
You are right. We have fire. even in this era of global warming, when it's always so balmy on a Washington night. But these days, what we have been doing is in order to see anybody, we sit outside and we make a little bonfire and put our earmuffs on and our winter coats and sit 10 feet apart and have mulled wine.
Maybe not do that. Maybe don't do it on Wednesday. Stay inside in DC on this Wednesday. It's
good advice
for a rainy and a forecast of Proud Boys. David Frum, great to have you.
Always a pleasure.
Great to be talking to you. Thank you so much. Let's do it again really soon. Keep up the great work, sir.
Bye-bye.
All right. David Frum, at David Frum on Twitter. Definitely go tell him that you heard him on the show. Definitely tell him that you appreciate him joining me, because that will make a huge difference. So go to Twitter if you are on Twitter. If you're not, create a Twitter account just to do that and to follow at Stand Up with Pete and at Pete Dominic. Okay, so my second guest of today's show is also named David. He is David Cay Johnston. He is a Pulitzer Prize, or is it Pulitzer Prize, award-winning investigative journalist who has worked at the LA Times and the New York Times, and he's now an independent journalist with his own outfit called DC Report Media on Twitter, and DCReport.org is the website. David Cay Johnston on Twitter, and don't forget the T. Okay, so we talked about his recent reporting at the DC Report and about the certification of the election, but specifically about the fact that Donald Trump is a hardened criminal. It really is, and very few reporters have covered him using the entire context of his career. But David Cay Johnston covered Donald Trump, knows him, covered him in New York. And we start by talking about the fact that David Cay Johnston thinks that Donald Trump absolutely invested in a cocaine trafficker back in the 80s, and that he has the proof for it. And he talks about this in his article about the pardons and loyalty and how Trump always wants something from you. And I thought it was really interesting and important. We talked about much more than that as well. Here is my most recent conversation with the great David Cay Johnston. Great year for your outlet, your independent journalism outlet, dcreport.org. A lot of great reporting and no shortage of subject matter, I suppose, sir.
No, and even when Donald leaves, we're going to keep going because, first of all, there's a lot of cleanup on Donald. It's going to take a long time, and there are going to be lots of challenges with this new administration, and we're going to cover them just as toughly as we've covered Donald.
So you've been covering Donald, which is why you call him Donald. I saw Brian Stelter try to push back on you calling him Donald. But do you call him that because you've known him for so long? You've been covering him for how long?
Almost a third of a century now.
Yeah.
Come May or June 1st, it'll be a third of a century. And, I call Nancy Pelosi Nancy because I know her. I call Chuck Schumer. I don't know a lot of other people. I've never met Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton. I got them to change their policies, but I never met any of those guys.
Well, I don't care what you call them. I'm psyched to have you reporting on all of them and constantly speaking truth to power and with your independent reporting now. And so lots to talk with you about. But first of all, I guess I read about this in which one of your books, but I never really talked with you about it, about President Trump, Donald Trump's past with cocaine dealing, which I thought was really interesting and really important and relevant now because there's just not been enough reporting on it. What is the connection? What is the story?
Donald Trump, like all casino operators, needed to have a fleet of helicopters to fly high rollers in and out from Boston to Washington to Atlantic City. And every other casino went to well-established helicopter companies. Donald Trump went to a bunch of guys who had one step away mob connections. The manager of the outfit was directly involved with mobsters. They were very lightly financed and primarily through government. They got New Jersey economic development money for their casino, for their helicopters for the casino business. And he hired this guy, Joe Wexelbaum, to personally manage his own helicopter, then called the Ivana, and often to fly him, as well as his sister and other family members around. Well, Joe Wexelbaum appeared to be in another business as a used car dealer for expensive high-end used cars down in Miami. But his real business was importing drugs from Colombia, marijuana by the ton, cocaine by the significant kilos. And he got caught. Joe was a twice convicted felon at this point from his past mob connections. And so when he got caught, he fessed up. He wrote a confession. And the scam was to run the drugs by car once they arrived in Miami up to Cincinnati. And he admitted that he actually handled the drugs. I mean, very few drug kingpins, they'll tell you, drugs, I've never seen drugs, never touched them in my life because they hire other people to do this. He actually loaded the cars, showed people how to hide the drugs in the cars. Well, when it came to sentencing, after he pled guilty, Joe asked that his case be moved either to Miami or New York City, where he had residences. Somehow his case got transferred to Newark, New Jersey, to the courtroom of a newly appointed federal judge by the name of Marianne Trump Berry, Donald Trump's older sister. Now, 3 weeks later, Donald's sister recused herself, that is, she removed herself from the case. But imagine for a moment, those of you listening, that you're the chief judge of the federal courts in New Jersey. And this newly appointed judge, considered marginally qualified, if not unqualified by the bar, comes to you and says, oh, I have to get rid of this case. You see, I fly in the helicopter with this man piloting me all the time. And my husband, who's a lawyer for Donald's Casinos, he flies back and forth in this man's helicopters to Atlantic City several times a week. You'd be thinking, my God, if the newspapers get a hold of this, what a scandal for the federal courts.
Sure.
7 years later, the late, great Wayne Barrett, the Village Voice, digs this up. I write about it based on my friend Wayne's work in the Philadelphia Inquirer. The New Jersey authorities ordered an investigation. And at the core of this is a letter that Donald wrote ostensibly to the judge sentencing Joe Wexelbaum. The letter says he's a stand-up guy, a, quote, credit to the community, end quote, and says he shouldn't serve any prison time.
Right.
Well, the mules who simply drove the drugs, that's all they did. They drove vans and cars from Florida to Ohio. They got 20 years. Joe served 18 months. When he got out, he said he was too broke to pay his $30,000 federal fine. He paid three $200 payments on it and then stopped. But he had the resources to move into a $2.4 million Trump Tower apartment, and he went back to work for Donald Trump as a helicopter dealer. I think the evidence here is overwhelming that Donald was in the financing side of Joe Wexelbaum's cocaine business. But even if you don't accept that, you think it's too far, anyone who reads that letter carefully knows, and you can read the letter online, it's posted at the Smoking Gun, it's in my book, The Making of Donald Trump. What he's saying in that letter isn't aimed at the judge. The letter is really written to Joe Wexelbaum, and what it says is, don't rat me out, pal, right, and I'll take care of you. And what did he do? Oh, man, did he take care of him. 18 months and then a multi-million-dollar apartment and a new job.
And the reason why I bring this up here is it relates to a piece of yours at dcreport.org about the pardons that we saw, which get maybe, I'm not going to say they got too little attention, David, but with everything that's happening, things moving so quickly because of how much news and scandal this man generates, I still feel like, and it was the end of the year, it hasn't gotten enough attention. But your piece is great about it. And in that piece, you write, Trump behaved last week exactly as any crime boss would act if he could exercise the powers of the American presidency, and specifically show mercy to criminals, especially criminals who have aided your crimes or whose supporters may be useful to you in the future, but do nothing for those who did the right thing once they were caught and helped bring others to justice. And you make a great several points about people who did do the right thing or what they were forced to do, maybe by the feds, and to bring others to justice, and he certainly didn't pardon them.
Right. And I have to tell you, I was kind of disappointed. I tweeted about this to refer people to the DC Report piece, and there were so many cynical comments. Well, we all knew that. Well, that's interesting. None of the journalists who wrote about this at the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, any other leading news organizations, none of the TV networks, none of them made this point. Because I went and read everything I could find looking for this. None of them, including the opinion columnists. Maybe reporters I can see not doing it, but none of the opinion columnists made this point. And it's because most people who cover politics don't have, as I do, deep experience with law enforcement and organized crime. And by the way, among people who are serious organized crime reporters, I'd be a piker to them. But compared to the people in Washington, I have deep knowledge. And it is, the cynicism is something Donald has aroused in his competition in the world. People who dislike Donald, and this is really bad. Democracy does not do well with cynicism. We need to say, oh, I need to know that, store that piece of information away, make sure I pay attention about that kind of an issue in the future. It's what causes people not to vote. It's the reason that at DC Report, we always refer to our government because we own it. And it's on our About page. Our view is we own our government. We should act like owners. We shouldn't act like renters or, as many people do, squatters if we want our liberties to endure. Our government. That's an important phrase. And by the way, part of the reason I call people like Donald is they work for us. They're not our bosses. We're their bosses. We temporarily imbue them with power to act on our behalf.
I think it's simpler than that, and that respect is earned. It's earned. It's not just given and afforded because you're in a uniform or you're in a position. But I know that's not the most popular, but that's how I grew up. Okay, so
I agree with you.
So 41 pardons that he granted, drawing a lot of attention, and not enough people noticing, of course, what you noticed because of your experience covering this man, as well as covering organized crime, which I think brings us, and everybody should read that unless there's anything more to talk about with that piece, and specifically, I'm sure there is. But it brings us to, I wanted to ask you about the tactics and techniques used and employed on the hour-long phone call the president made to the Georgia Secretary of State, which by now probably a lot of people have heard. But, the main question I hear a lot of people asking is, how many other calls did he make that are similar that we haven't heard? So what is your take on the way that he talked and the techniques that he used and that he uses, to speak in a certain way that he might not be able to get in trouble for legally, because you've been covering him for so long and you understand these mob tactics?
I've been on the other side of phone calls just like this one with Donald many times when he called me at home or at my office. Well, first of all, understand Donald made 18 calls before Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, would accept his phone call. 18 previous tries. I am certain that Donald called other elections officials and berated them in the style you see in this hour-long conversation. Now, I just got off Iranian television. I'm often appear live on television in Tehran. And they had on some pseudo-journalist Trump supporter from a Tennessee publication of no note who was just full of Trump nonsense and how this phone call was unethical by the Raffensperger because he shouldn't have recorded the call. And he shouldn't have leaked the call. And he should have told them. And after all, this was just a negotiation to avoid a lawsuit. The presidents don't and politicians don't call up and negotiate vote results. So what Trump did here was he committed crimes, both federal crimes and Georgia crimes. Now, the FBI says they're not going to investigate, as they've been asked by 2 Democratic members of Congress. The Fulton County District Attorney may proceed with this, but threatening doesn't mean calling out as the guy who was on TV with the 82nd Airborne. Donald's language is clearly menacing and threatening. And threatening a public official to in any way alter or interfere with an election is a crime under both federal law and Georgia law. Will Donald ever be prosecuted for this? Probably not. But we should be aware that this is illegal conduct. And this is how Donald operates. He had on the phone, he's now trying to float the story out there that this was a personal phone call. Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, placed the call. He had people from the White House on the call. Nonsense. This was an official call for the president of the United States.
Yeah, I don't know how you can even split those hairs.
Well, he did. I mean, if he said, I got to go make a private phone call, and he rented a room in a hotel at the Hay Adams across the street, or gone to Mar-a-Lago, you might make a colorable argument. But no, he did this right from the White House.
What?
So it is. This is how Donald operates behind the scenes. It's what journalists, were not getting at back in 2016. They weren't putting enough effort into getting people to tell about this way that Donald operates. And this is how he operates.
And so in terms of how he does operate psychologically, at DC Report, you've been working a lot with psychiatrist Bandy Lee, who wrote an entire book about this, where she gathered a whole bunch of experts. Also, Harper West, who is a psychotherapist, joined her in a piece. So it's fair to ask you about, and Donald Trump. So what about what you heard on that phone call and how he generally operates in terms of, my question specifically is, David, does he believe that, say, a lot of the things that he hears in conspiracies and cable news and other places, does he believe that those things that he is saying, that he is accusing the Georgia Secretary of State, that for example, ballots were shredded, does he actually believe all of that? It sounds like he does.
Well, he uses things that are useful. And if you tell yourself something enough times and it becomes incorporated, especially into your long-term memory. I mean, remember when Brian Williams, the NBC nightly news host, told this story about a helicopter being under attack, and he kept telling it and embellishing it. It got more and more embellished over time. So we all make, mistakes or misremember things. But in Donald's case, he finds anything he can grasp that'll be useful to him, whether it's to attack you, Pete, because he wants you off the air, or to get a benefit from somebody in a business deal. You know, I'm going to tell your wife about the girlfriend my team has found out about. Whatever it is, he'll use it. And if he keeps using it, then he's convinced himself that it's true. And I'm sure that Donald has convinced himself the election was stolen, and he will go to his grave believing that. And the reason for this is that Donald grew up in a household where he had this very cold, distant mother, and his father was a monster, an absolute monster, who demanded you have to win. And if you had to lie, cheat, steal, beat somebody up, that didn't matter. It's that you had to win. There was no excuses, no acceptance for anything else. And then the summer he turns 13, the year he went through that same process we all went through, somewhere between 11 and 14, of puberty, he gets shipped off to this military academy known for brutalizing and, according to some sources, sexually humiliating new cadets. And Donald has been trapped emotionally in that year. I mean, just imagine, Pete, if you'd lived all the years you've lived, a lot fewer than me, and you emotionally were stunted at the 7th or 8th grade level. That's Donald. He's a child emotionally.
Let me ask you now about another piece at DC Report, something you've been covering a long time, which is about voting machines. We've heard a tremendous amount about a company called Dominion, but we haven't heard as much about electronic systems and software, ES&S, and that is what you've been digging into. What have you found, and why have you even been looking?
Well, Donald has only been attacking Dominion and, to a minor extent, a third company that's the third player in the field. But he hasn't been attacking ES&S. And so we have someone writing for us now who's not a journalist by training, and I think we're the first people to publish her, who started looking at this. And lo and behold, there's a county in Kentucky that used ES&S machines where Mitch McConnell has never won, where Democrats won as recently as the 2019 state elections, where suddenly Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump are getting 5 votes, or Mitch McConnell is getting 5 votes for every vote he got the last time around. Now, you can have that kind of a change, but it'd be highly, highly unusual to see that kind of a voting pattern. And so we called ES&S. And after call after call after call, somebody answered the phone, and the woman said, "I'm sorry, I can't tell you anything. I can't even tell you my name. I can't put you through. I can't tell you who you want to talk to." And they've never responded. Congress has asked, well, who owns this outfit? It was funded originally or organized by Republicans, including Chuck Hagel, who was a Republican senator from Nebraska and was defense secretary for a while. Why are they being so totally secretive? And by the way, interestingly, their address in Omaha is on John Galt Boulevard. Anybody who's read Ayn Rand knows that John Galt is a very important figure in right-wing libertarian politics in America. And we don't know if it's an anomaly or it's revealing, but we did think it was a curious fact. Voting machine issues in America go back a long way. In 1990 or 91, a computer science group at Princeton wrote a report on how easy it is to manipulate these systems using, 1990 software. And they hired my wife to turn it into plain English, and her report got them onto the CBS Evening News. We've literally had judges in this country rule that vote counting companies' proprietary rights to keep their code secret trump the right of the public to audit voting results. In Texas, as recently as 6 weeks before the election, officials were saying the system has problems. We've had judges describe ES&S machines as being so bad, the state of Georgia was ordered not to use them anymore by a federal judge. And that's why they went to Dominion. And the judge called them unreliable, inaccurate, falling apart. And these are the machines, by the way, you may remember in the news a couple of years ago where an 11-year-old hacked a voting machine at a big national conference about electronic software. Yeah, it took less than an hour. An 11-year-old hacked the ES&S system. ES&S contends that you couldn't do that anymore, but they haven't been willing to provide a machine for 11-year-olds to try and hack again. So we're very concerned about the integrity of the elections. And here's a fundamental principle, Pete. If Donald Trump is constantly pointing at one company or person or party or anything, and not at somebody else doing the same thing, what you should say is, why is he focusing my attention here? Let's go look at what he doesn't want us to focus our attention on. That's why we started looking at ES&S. We will have more stories on ES&S, and we're going to be limited only by the amount of money we can raise to pay for it, because we run DC Report on a shoestring. We spend less money each month than the New York Times spends every day on just covering the White House, and yet we've beaten New York Times, my former employer, a couple dozen times on stories, because we don't go to press conferences, we don't act on press releases, we just look at the public record.
So support dcreport.org, folks, and keep reading these stories about ES&S. I mean, you're just asking questions. What do you think may have happened in Kentucky or in any other elections based on the answers to the questions that you've gotten on ES&S?
Yeah, and fundamentally, Pete, beyond that, Canada doesn't have these scandals. Canadian elections are done on paper. I think we need to seriously debate going back to regular old paper ballots and hand counting them, mostly by people who are volunteers. The old problem of the sheriff's car picks up the ballot and pulls off in the woods and stuffs it full of additional ballots. We can easily solve those now, because we can put a GPS tracker on the stuff, and you can watch the sheriff's car. You can even put a Republican and Democrat in the back seat, go down to election headquarters, and we know how many miles it should be. And if it's 10.1 miles and your odometer says 14, deputy, you are suspended. Why are we spending all this money on this technology when, in fact, good old-fashioned paper ballots will work just fine? We wouldn't get the results quite as quickly. Or maybe we just use regular paper and we count the ballots immediately. And then what they've done in Georgia is, I think they've done 3 full recounts where they hand tabulated everything, and they come up with almost exactly the same number. If you're counting 2.5 million votes, the tallies aren't going to be perfect.
Yeah,
you're going to find 1 or 2 different vote difference.
There's no matter what, there's no way that Americans across the political spectrum are ever going to fully trust these kind of computerized voting machines. I mean, there's already so much distrust in our election based on the past couple of elections that, and then you also see all of these different news stories about hacks and interference. And so you don't need to know much to lose your trust in these voting machines.
And Pete, we're the only modern country, democratic country, that has all these rules about you got to register, you in some places identify yourself,
right,
et cetera, et cetera. And in non-federal elections, my school district in Western New York, where I live, all you do is show up at the polls. Now, I'm a registered voter already, but if I were to show up and I wasn't registered, all I have to do is bring a utility bill or a property tax bill proving I live in the district, even if I were not a U.S. citizen. So why are we not opening up voting? Why is all this effort to limit who can vote, to get people who committed felonies, keep them from voting? No, we should have the maximum number of people voting, because that's how you get the most representative government.
Finally, just wanted to ask you just for your opinion on what you see happening in the next 20 days while Donald Trump is still in power. What are your concerns, and what are you watching? Because you also have a piece about this Wednesday and the certification of the president, which is normally a boring process, but this week it's unfortunately it looks like there could be some real violence in D.C., not to mention some hijinks in the Capitol.
Well, Donald is deliberately calling people, not for the first time, to be violent and intimidate people. And I'm worried about Wednesday in terms of what may happen in the streets. Hopefully, the number of people who show up will be very small. It'll be interesting to see the size of the crowds. And let's not forget, 6 million women across the country turned out the day after he took office. Donald started his political vandalism on election night. I've written a couple of pieces for British newspapers and for DC Report about this. He will issue more pardons. He's going to pardon his family. If he pardons himself, I don't think the Supreme Court will let it stand. I think that's very clear from the opinion last summer about no man is above the law, because if the president can pardon himself, he could go kill people and get on federal soil and get away with it. But there will be more political vandalism, and he will not leave graciously. And once he's out, now that he's raised this $250 million from badly informed people or people who hate democracy. I mean, those are the 2 categories he's raising money from. He's going to do everything he can to undermine our democracy, to take away the liberties of the people. And we should be troubled about how many people, including elected members of Congress of the Senate, are willing to subvert our democracy because they believe in the cult of Donald Trump. This should be very, very troubling to us. And just as at the time of the Civil War, a bunch of senators and representatives were not seated, I think, I would hope, I don't think it'll happen, that in the House and the Senate, if the Democrats get control, they refuse to seat people who undertook what are seditious actions to undo our democracy.
Not going to happen, I'm sure, but it would certainly make things more interesting and be the right thing to do morally. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't seem that controversial to me. Thank you for joining me. Keep up the great reporting at DC Report. Follow him on Twitter, where he's great at David Cay Johnston. And always appreciate your time, my friend. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Take care.
All right, there he goes, David Cay Johnston. Subscribe to DCReport.org, where he and his colleagues are doing excellent journalism. Always love when I talk to him. David Cay Johnston, David Frum. That is today's episode of Stand Up. If you're not a paid subscriber, I cannot continue to do this without your support, and I'd love to have you be a subscriber. I'd love to have you join us on the Discord platform so that you're never alone 24/7, and Thursdays at 8 with the Zoom Hangouts. Always going to be inviting special guests to join us and check in with folks from all over the country and all over the world, actually. And that's it. That's all I got for you today. I love you. You're not alone. I'll talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up. Take it away, John Carroll.